Time to talk about Peter Thiel. Joining us is the author of a brand new book about Peter Thiel. It's called The Contrarian, Peter Thiel and Silicon Valley's Pursuit of Power. Please welcome Max Chafkin. Did I pronounce your last name properly?
You nailed it. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you for doing this. You are also a writer and an editor over at Bloomberg.
Yeah, that's
Business
right.
Week?
Yep. Yeah, Bloomberg Business Week. So I edit magazine features as my day job.
Right. This book is getting a lot of notice. It's all over the news.
Yeah, so Thiel is this really controversial figure, and so my background, my kind of how I got into this is as a tech reporter covering the tech industry and kind of watching over the last 15 years as Thiel. Just this guy is kind of everywhere in tech. So he was the co-founder of PayPal, the first outside investor in in Facebook, and really kind of, I'd say, the most important figure in Facebook's history besides Mark Zuckerberg. He's kind of the guy who set Zuck up in the way that he's currently set up as this authoritarian over this, enormous, media empire. Thiel's also, the co-founder of Palantir, which is this big, defense contractor that does data mining. He's in tons of startups that people have heard of. And I think all that I think would be really interesting for a book. But of course, he's also this kind of political figure who played a role in the Trump election, and has, I think post-Trump is trying to really set himself up as like a patron to the Trump wing of the Republican Party, which of course,
like the Mercer family, that kind of.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. When I was working on the book, I was reading Cokeland, which is this Christopher Leonard book that it's the history of Coke Industries, a portrait of Coke Industries, and I think there's a good parallel there with the Cokes, because the Cokes have this kind of business project that feeds into an ideological project, and then the ideological project is kind of aligned with the business project, and it's this virtuous or vicious, depending on your point of view, cycle. And I think the same thing with Thiel, except we're talking about kind of post-industrial businesses, tech businesses, and we're talking about not the kind of mainstream Republican Party. We're talking about this kind of insurgent wing, or however you want to describe it, the Trump Party.
Right. In my reading of him, he's a bad guy. I'm a lefty, and he is, in my book, evil. What's he worth?
Well, it's not entirely clear because he's been super successful. I'm sure this will, we can talk about whether this is good or bad.
IRA?
Yeah.
What's
exactly.
his Roth IRA worth?
So he's got, I would guess, he's in the ballpark of $10 billion, maybe a bit higher. If you look at the estimates, that they're a little bit lower than that, but I sort of argue in the book that it's probably higher. His Roth IRA, which people don't know, that's an investment account that was created in the 90s, basically for middle class and lower middle class taxpayers, super low income caps. You can't contribute to a Roth if your income is over about $100,000. And back when Thiel started putting money in, the limit that you could put in per year was $2,000. And all that money is tax free. And he had $5 billion in the Roth as of 2019. Now, the stock market's gone up a ton since then. So it's probably, that Roth IRA, I don't know if I had to guess, something like $8 billion or something at this point. So that's $8 billion, no capital gains, no taxes at all on that.
Right. And my listeners should know about a Roth IRA because they probably qualify for one. If you're 22, 23 starting out, if you could put any money into a Roth IRA now, by the time you're 71, you will not have anything to worry about. Pretty close to that being the truth. Somehow the idea is you don't have to pay taxes when you take money out of the Roth IRA. It grows tax free. And then when you retire, you can remove it tax free. And somehow he is able to he put some stock options in his Roth IRA. I guess it's legal.
Well,
But-
it's super aggressive. I mean, it's legal. It's one of these things where like, probably the legal stuff is like more scandalous than the illegal stuff. But like,
Right.
So the rules are written very carefully when they were set up so that you couldn't invest in you couldn't put your own company stock into your Roth IRA. So like if you owned a store, you couldn't like put the stock in your small business into your Roth IRA because it creates problems with self-dealing and things like that. Now, Thiel, when he got the PayPal stock, which he purchased, it's something like, a 1/1000th of a penny per share. So we're talking, basically for free. He did not technically control PayPal because, the company was set up, as a I can't remember, as a corporation or an LLC or whatever, but it's set up with a board of directors and Thiel only owned, I don't know, like 15-20% of the company. But so in a legal sense, he didn't control it. But in a practical sense and in the kind of normal sense of how normal people talk about what control means, he did. He was a CEO, the founder, at various points in the company's history, he was able to kind of demand more shares by threatening to quit. And that's the kind of thing that, I think to a normal person, that sounds like control. Of course, as the IRS interprets it and has interpreted it, that is not control. So it's totally legal, but it's very aggressive. And,
Right.
And it's kind of interesting. I think a lot of stuff with Peter Thiel's like this, where the guy, if you think he's evil, you kind of have to respect the kind of brilliance of this. And because like he's been a pioneer of this kind of super aggressive tax thing. Lots of other Silicon Valley rich guys have done the exact same thing. And you can find like ProPublica, this was kind of heartbreaking to me, but like ProPublica broke this story, while my book was like in galley. So like, anyway, it broke my heart, but like the Wall Street Journal editorial page did a response to it. And the response is basically, and you can too. It's not like, oh, this is a big scandal. It's like, hey, this is a great way to get one over on the tax man. And so he's been really influential in that department. And there are lots of areas where he's done these things that I think, are seem pretty questionable. And but like there's a large cohort of people who look at them as like, awesome lessons in, how to get one over on the world or the regulators or something like that.
Right. How old is Peter Thiel?
He is 53 years old, I believe.
He was in the closet. He was not openly gay.
Yeah. So he came out, as far as I understand it, in the early 2000s. We don't know exactly when.
Did he come out, or did Gawker?
It's kind of a complicated. I guess it depends on what you mean exactly. When the Gawker post happened, he was out to friends and family and to his employees and things like that. He was not out publicly. I think the Gawker post, the Gawker post outed him publicly, and that, of course,
is that why he financed Hulk Hogan's lawsuit against Gawker?
Well, it's like a long and complicated story, and they're different interpretations. Thiel has said, yes, that's the reason. And he's more or less insisted it's the only reason, although he has at times dropped little hints. I kind of think, having like dug into this pretty deeply and, talked to people who are involved and also talk to people on all sides of this, I think that, if Gawker had not published that post, he would never have pursued he would never have done what he did, which was secretly fund this litigation, destroy the media company. But it's pretty important to say that in addition to this post that I think most journalists, especially today, and even then, look at as kind of like not an acceptable kind of journalism, was also doing a lot of really good journalism and were investigating. He had a huge hedge fund at the time. They were running critical stories of his hedge fund. They were running stories that were, critical of, aspects of his venture capital fund. It wasn't, and I think some of those pieces may have contributed to his sense that he was being persecuted. And so
he did something that chills the First Amendment. He funded a lawsuit against a news gathering operation. Gawker, as you say, had questionable journalistic practices, but there's still reporters, and he put them out of business.
Yep. Yeah, and I think
chilling.
100% chilling. I mean, and I think So it's
Is that because of is the judge to blame for that? Who's to blame for that?
I mean, I think you could blame Peter Thiel. I think is one obvious candidate. I mean, but also the
Hulk
judge.
Hogan, Hulk Hogan, Bubba the Love Sponge, the wife, a video, something. It ended up. Who cares? It's garbage people, and I mean that. So there was a lawsuit. What was the settlement?
So it was a jury verdict, and so there was no settlement. And that's kind of like the whole thing. I mean, a jury ruled that Gawker had violated Hulk Hogan's privacy. Normally these cases don't make it to jury trial because normally you don't have a vindictive billionaire paying the legal bills, excuse me, and somebody like Hulk Hogan. Normally, like the incentive is to settle. I believe off the top of my head, I think it's 140 million when you add in all of there's like compensatory and all the damage is something like 140 billion.
And Gawker can't go to the judge because the judge can overrule a jury's decision. Can't you say you want this Gawker to go out of business because of this?
Yeah. So, I'm not a legal scholar, but I'll summarize best I can. The judge basically put Gawker into receivership as soon as this happened. And that's something that definitely accelerated and people who are familiar with the law will probably get this better than I am off the top of my head.
Is it Nick Denton who ran Gawker? Nick
Denton's the founder. But anyway, what I'm saying
is he to blame for Gawker going out of business? Could he have saved Gawker?
I think there's some question in my mind if he had made at least when I went into this, I thought if he had made some kind of big public gesture, apologized publicly for the post, that maybe he could have saved Gawker. But then
don't they have insurance?
No, that's the kind of that's the kind of evil genius behind it. So Thiel specifically targeted this lawsuit because it's a privacy violation lawsuit, and that normally news organizations have like libel insurance or for defamation, but it wasn't a defamation case, and so it's kind of like very devious and sort of brilliant thing. They also there were actually two allegations of wrongdoing, one of which was this invasion of privacy, and the other was involving some sort of emotional harm. And Hogan actually dropped the emotional harm part of this case after Gawker was trying to get its insurance to cover that, like the legal bills under like a sort of slip and fall policy, right? Because in addition to having libel insurance, most news organizations have, and all companies, right, have insurance, just general business liability insurance. And they dropped this other allegation basically, as I understand it, right? Of course, like maybe there's another story, but my understanding is they dropped it, and they dropped it because it takes the insurance out of play, and at that point, Gawker's on its own. And then the thing is, like, maybe Gawker could have survived if Peter Thiel hadn't first been exposed by Forbes. Forbes did a story saying it's Peter Thiel, and then Peter Thiel comes out, gives an interview to the New York Times where he says,
Forbes outed Peter Thiel
as the guy behind the Gawker thing. And they
didn't out him as being gay.
No, not as being gay. Excuse me. Yeah. So Florida jury makes the judgment. And not long after, Forbes does a story and says, hey, this Hulk Hogan case, the guy who's paying the bills is a guy named Peter Thiel. He's a billionaire. Thiel immediately goes to the New York Times and says, yep, it's me. Not only is it me, but like, I am proud of this. It's my greatest philanthropic act ever. There may be other, I'd have to go back and look, but I'm pretty sure he says there may be other lawsuits in play. And that sends a signal to any investor, any other insurance company, anybody else, that like Gawker, you're basically going to war with an exceeding.
Well, how many lawyers vetted your book?
It was vetted in like the normal, legal process. So like Penguin
I would assume Peter Thiel did not cooperate with you.
No, he didn't cooperate. And I approached this as.
He threatened you?
He didn't. At least, and I'll say further, like nobody who seemed in any way to be speaking for Peter Thiel threatened me. Now, they didn't help me. They didn't make my life easy, but I was able to do my job as a journalist, and got to
Does he
give.
want publicity? Is he one of those people who wants to be behind the scenes, or
That's a good
he's
question.
not?
Yeah, I think he's kind of. I mean, he definitely is somebody who I think is like probably secretly a really great marketer and has, through a combination of writing, speaking, maybe some relationships with the press, and also relationships with other sort of powerful people, created this image of himself. And the image of himself is of this like really powerful guy who, depending on your political take, is either like, a Ayn Randian superhero or like some kind of supervillain or whatever. And I think to some extent, Thiel has helped like engineer that and done so somewhat deliberately. And I think he enjoys that. And so,
So we're talking with Max Chafkin. He's the author of the new book, The Contrarian, Peter Thiel, and Silicon Valley's Pursuit of Power. We haven't talked about Silicon Valley's pursuit of power. As a side note, until I read about Peter Thiel financing Hulk Hogan's suit against Gawker, I didn't know that you could go out and get funding for a lawsuit. Now I'm reading that hedge funds, they have so much money and they have to invest it. Money is a cancer. You cannot hold on to cash. So this money, like a cancer, has to go somewhere, and it infects everything, including our legal system. I am now reading that hedge funds are investing in lawsuits. Is that a new thing? Did this start before Peter Thiel?
Yeah, I think this has been around kind of low key going on for a long time. And there is like, you can make an ethical argument for it in the sense that like, if you're, if you're somebody who is a single person going up against a large corporation, right? They've wronged you in a big way. Maybe it should be okay for you to find somebody to pay your legal bills, and maybe you should be able to pay them back. But of course, it's or pay them back with interest, right? But of course, when it's like a billionaire going after, an American, media outlet, I don't know. I mean, I think like really smart people can disagree on how good or bad Gawker was, but like the implications, the chilling effect that you brought up earlier, like I think that's really bad. And like people keep asking.
We have the Seventh Amendment. The Seventh Amendment to the Constitution guarantees your right to a civil trial. If somebody is suing you and they're being financed by, a hedge fund company, that's got to be a violation of the Seventh Amendment. How can that be fair if you're up against, unlimited pockets? So Silicon Valley, they are marketing geniuses. They portray themselves as hip and cool. But there's not only a libertarian streak in the ethos of Silicon Valley, there's a right-wing streak from the very beginnings of Silicon Valley, dating back to Hewlett Packard, right? There would be no Silicon Valley if there weren't a military-industrial complex, correct?
100% agree. And it's been completely lost in the kind of, sort of Steve Jobs, like counterculture, tech as counterculture. Of course, tech is
Amazon and Microsoft are fighting over defense contracts. I think that Microsoft got a $10 billion deal with the Pentagon last year, and Amazon challenged it because they felt that Donald Trump was going after Jeff Bezos to get even with him for the Washington Post. Microsoft and Amazon, they do a lot of business with the military.
Yeah, 100%. And Google as well does a lot of they all do. And like you said, it totally goes back to the, the original roots of the place. It's like, it's pretty funny. Silicon Valley was the military industrial complex. Like that's what, when people were talking about that in the, 50s and 60s, that's kind of what they meant. And as you said, and I don't think it's just that, it's connected to the military. There was also, this kind of strain of like right wing thought that goes back even further, back to the earliest days of Stanford. And remember, Stanford's first president. I talk about this book. Stanford's first president, David Starr Jordan, was a eugenicist. And like the eugenicist. Obviously the Hoover Institution became this like defining. It's like the landmark at Stanford.
Shockley. You talk about Shockley?
Shockley, exactly.
Tell us about Shockley. Go ahead. Tell me about Shockley. He invented the transistor, right?
Yeah, and won the Nobel Prize as well, and then just kind of went off the deep end and became like the in-house eugenicist at Stanford. It's his legacy is weird because he's one of these people I want to like learn more about, just because like his legacy is weird. He was involved with this like really important seminal discovery, but then like the guys who founded Intel, they broke away from him. It's like a legend in Silicon Valley. They quit the company, and he was sort of cast out and kind of found a home at Stanford. But again, like there was just a lot of both kind of conservative and ultra conservative, but also like super ultra libertarian thought going on in Silicon Valley.
The Grateful Dead connection to all this. It kind of exposes the Grateful Dead's. Maybe the Grateful Dead wasn't as hippie as I thought it was. What is the Grateful Dead?
That I don't know. Actually, I'm only vaguely familiar with what you're talking about.
Okay. Well, hopefully you'll come back. And
definitely. I'd love to talk about that.
Does Apple do business with the military?
So probably, I would guess that if they have Defense Department money, it's like pretty small. I mean, like I'm sure Apple sells devices to the military, just like, and same thing with Microsoft. So like Microsoft has that Jedi contract, right? That's the one you're talking about, the $10 billion thing. But they also, of course, sell a lot of Word, Microsoft Word, and like just their basic software, of course, is sold to the military. Military is a huge buyer of everything. So like in that sense, I'm sure that they're buying Apple products, Apple devices, and Facebook. Like there are probably some ads that the Army or the military is probably buying some ads, but I think probably it's not as significant for either of those businesses as it is for Microsoft, Google, and Amazon, because all three of those operate these like cloud computing services that like the military, like everybody really needs, but the military, of course, has a lot of data needs, and so that's where that money's going. But
why the contrarian? Why is it called the contrarian?
Well, that's Thiel's like investment philosophy, which I think, and it's I don't know. I mean, I struggle with the title a little bit, but he has talked about this like thinking different, right, as being a key to how he's made money over the years. You can go down like long rabbit holes where Thiel fans talk about like the philosophy behind this. But I also think it raises there's a question inherent in like being a contrarian, being a self-proclaimed contrarian. And I say this as somebody who, like, I've probably have my own contrarian tendencies, but like there's a question about whether you believe anything, right? Like, do you actually believe because contrarianism isn't really like a belief system. It's just
right.
It's just a set of bets, basically. And I do think one of the central questions, and some people disagree with me on this, that about Thiel is, does he actually believe in anything, or is he just like a rich guy who's, managed to, gather an insane amount of power and a sizable amount of wealth by making smart and often selfish, bets. And I suspect like
did he grow up wealthy?
No,
did he come from a rich family?
He grew up middle class. His parents are German immigrants. His dad was an engineer. Kind of the history is really weird and fascinating. His dad was a project manager at nuclear mines, or uranium mines, excuse me, and spent time in mining in the U.S., but also there was a period of Peter Thiel's life where they were living in South Africa. This was in the 1970s, where they spent a couple years, I think a year in South Africa and then 2 years in Southwest Africa, which is Namibia, but back then was like a colony, an apartheid state colony of South Africa. And of course, if you know anything about the history, right, like being involved in the nuclear industry of South Africa in the 1970s, you are very bought into the apartheid system. And I don't think like Thiel was a kid. Like, I don't think he, whatever. I don't think you blame him for that, but I do think him kind of developing these like kind of reactionary politics in college, he became this famous as kind of a right-wing conservative activist, probably has to do with kind of his upbringing.
Where did college?
Stanford.
Oh, Peter Thiel went to Stanford.
Yeah. He went to Stanford. And started this newspaper, the Stanford Review, which was kind of like modeled after the Dartmouth Review, Dinesh D'Souza's paper, the Cornell Review, the Ann Coulter's paper. And he and Ann Coulter are friends to this day.
Right. The infamous Dartmouth Laura Ingraham.
Yeah.
There's some rumors about her and Dinesh D'Souza, which we won't get into, maybe at office hours. We're talking with Max Chafkin. He's the author of The Contrarian, Peter Thiel and Silicon Valley's Pursuit of Power. We have some questions. Joe in Norway wants to know about Peter Thiel's relationship to Palantir. You touched on what Palantir is. And do you know what the nature of Palantir's business relations are with various government agencies around the world?
Yeah. So Palantir, it's a data mining company. Basically, they make software. It's gone through a bunch of different iterations, but they make software that makes it easier for big organizations, primarily or largely anyway, government organizations, but also some big banks, to kind of garner insights. Now, those insights could mean like how to allocate your supply chain or something like that. But of course, they're used at times for intelligence gathering and stuff like that. They have a lot of contracts with the U.S. government. They have some contracts with allied countries, the British government, and I actually haven't looked closely at how deep in they are with European countries. Like, I don't know off the top of my head if they have a deal with anyone in Norway, but it wouldn't surprise me. One thing about Palantir, I think the company, there are a lot of things about the company that I think are ethically questionable, and they have a long track record of sort of getting into doing things that do not suggest that they should be allowed to be custodians of large quantities of data. I think most famously, there was a leaked presentation, I think around 2012, where they were planning like an information op against Glenn Greenwald, the journalist, on behalf of a large bank. They apologized, backed away, but there's been a series of these things. But I think you also have to understand that like the company has at times kind of used this reputation to hype itself. And I think that it's not so much that Palantir is like this scary big brother thing, but it's that Palantir, is involved with is involved in an area that is ripe for abuse. They've at times showed themselves not particularly good, ethically. They've behaved unethically at times, or seem to behave unethically at times, and and like it, I think it creates a permission structure also that allows other people to do other bad things. Sorry, that's kind of complicated.
Yeah, no, it's great. We have one more question. Hopefully you'll come back.
Absolutely.
Please buy this book, The Contrarian, Peter Thiel and Silicon Valley's Pursuit of Power. It's authored by Max Chafkin, and buy the book so he'll come back. We have to sell books in order for him to come back. The last question we have from our virtual studio audience who are attending in our Zoom room is people who don't understand where the value is in Facebook, Microsoft, and Google's customer list. It comes from, I'm trying to read this for the first time. People who don't understand where the value in Facebook, Microsoft, and Google's customer list comes from keep talking about splitting them up through antitrust. Have you heard of any smarter way to take their power away without creating 10 of each?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think, and unfortunately, like I'm not an antitrust expert, so I don't really know. I don't really have any good ideas there, but I think the point that you raise is a smart one, and that's part of the reason why we've had such a hard time contending with these companies is that Facebook has competitors, right? So that's why kind of like there's Twitter, TikTok. There are a bunch of competitors, sort of. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have like tons of power and tons of power over thought and over our speech. And so I don't know. I know that people have floated these like really extreme things like, considering them utilities. That's something that's come up on the right, but I think also at times on the left. I haven't really looked closely at it. I'm not sure how workable it is, but it does seem like trying to bring new thinking to antitrust is probably the way to go.
Yeah, I would love you to come back. I in the past, we're out of time, and I kept you waiting 10 minutes. I apologize. There is a problem in this country of financial illiteracy. When people don't read the Wall Street Journal or Bloomberg, unfortunately, if you can't understand the financial pages, the business pages, you're not qualified to discuss the issues facing our country, because one side, the 1%, that's the first place they turn to every day. Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, the business pages. And if my people, the left, don't understand finance, we're at a severe disadvantage. We can't make the argument. So I would love you to come back and just help explain to me and my listeners how all this stuff works. I'm always stunned by people who have these deep-seated convictions on the left and the right. And then when you ask them, well, how will this affect something in the finance? I don't know, understand that. Well, then you're not really equipped. We have senators and Congress people who don't understand finance, and yet they have these deeply held convictions. They don't even understand what breaking up Google means. I mean, breaking up Google and Facebook, the only people who suffer if you break up Facebook and Google are, Mark Zuckerberg is the only person who suffers if you break up Facebook. The people who own stock in Facebook do incredibly better. The employees do incredibly better, but it's the language. Break it up. Sounds like you're going to destroy it. No, you're going to create 10 companies out of one. And whenever they look at these companies, their breakup value is usually worth way more than it is whole.
Yeah. Totally agree. And I think I would love to have a conversation about this.
Yeah.
I totally agree. It's really important. And it's like something that people don't talk about enough. So thanks again for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'd love to have you back. Max Chafkin writes for Bloomberg. He's also author of the new book, The Contrarian, Peter Thiel, and Silicon Valley's Pursuit of Power. We'll try to get you back next week. Thank you, Max.
Sounds great.
Thank you. You're listening to The David Feldman Show, davidfeldmanshow.com. Please buy the book, The Contrarian, Peter Thiel, and Silicon Valley's Pursuit of Power by Max Chafkin.